Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Dr. Michael Rothman, author of Edibolic Stress, How the Lies You Are Being Fed Are Making You Sick. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Natasha.
I'm happy to have you here, and I want to know all about the lies I'm being fed. But explain, what does edibolic stress mean?
Basically, it's the edible stressors that you're consuming a lot of people are actually consuming foods on a daily basis that are really poisoning themselves, and they're not aware of this. And in fact, often it's the person that's trying the hardest that's being hurt the most because of all the misinformation and all the lies that permeate the misinformation that's out there.
You know, it's as a consumer, it's very confusing, and I'm someone who doesn't buy into, because the doctor said it, then it's so. I don't take medications unless I do the research and all of that, and yet I'm sure I am consuming. I'm one of those people who try things that are not good for me. So where do I start looking?
Well, it's very confusing, and you should be confused because there's people out there purposely trying to distort the truth. And every once in a while you do get a kernel of the truth out there, and then you get other distortions, and for you to be able to filter this, I would say it's literally impossible. And just going back, just say 10, 12 years ago, I was extremely confused about all the misinformation out there.
As a physician?
As a physician, as someone who is very concerned about this, as someone who spent hours every day researching and researching, and the more research I did, the more confused I got, until I reached a point about 7 or 8 years ago when all of a sudden, now I got the big picture and I understand the truth about how things work. And so now everything that I learn now, I can sort of put into its place and realize where it sits, whether this is healthy or unhealthy, or I need to do more research into it. But I'm no longer confused.
Wow. So you're a physician and you were confused.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good thing, because very often physicians should be confused and just assume that what they know is it and spew it out. So that's very encouraging that you were confused and you did a lot of research. What was the compelling force behind that? What were you mostly confused about?
Everything.
And you were ill yourself, right?
Right, and this is really what brought me to this point in my life. When I was 19, I was diagnosed having Crohn's disease, and I was told that this was an incurable disorder, and that because it ran in my family, and I met all the profiles, and I had all the symptoms, and I had all the tests were consistent with Crohn's disease, and I was told I would have to live in pain and misery my whole life, on medications, at risk for cancer, at risk for complications. And yet, deep inside of myself, I realized that I was actually part of the problem, and therefore I had to be part of the solution. And the part of the problem was that I was anxious. And when I was anxious, my symptoms got worse, and when I was calm, my symptoms got better. When I tried to explain this to my doctors, they invariably just sort of laughed at me. I'd see a little smirk, on their face. Their eyes would roll back. Mm-hmm. And they would just
arrogant little smirk.
Yes, and they would basically tell me, listen, kid, get used to it. You're going to be sick your whole life, and just learn to live with it. I never, ever accepted that. I always thought that they were missing something. And I did try taking their medications for a while, and they really didn't help. And yet when I noticed this pattern that when I was calmer, things were better. When I was not calmer, things were worse. And so I sort of went on this journey in college to figure out, how do I help myself control my emotions. And I started getting into running and martial arts and meditation. I took courses in mind-body connectiveness, and lo and behold, over the next year or so, I got better and better and better without taking any medications. I didn't really know anything about diet at the time. And then I reached a point where I said to myself, you know what, I want to go to medical school because I want to find out, why did I get better? Why did I get sick in the first place? And why the heck did my doctors not even listen to what I had to say? So when I did get into medical school at the University of Miami, which is a very good school, it was very evident to me fairly quickly, within the first few days of school, what the problem was. And the problem was that we were being taught how to diagnose and treat diseases, but we really weren't learning what caused these diseases in the first place. Mm. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of confusion, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that there's a hierarchy in medicine. And the hierarchy is, if you're a specialist, you know more than everybody else. And if you're not a specialist, you're just supposed to sit there and listen to what they tell you. And whatever it is that the experts tell you, you just say, well, that's what it is, and we're just going to accept it because, well, they're experts. The problem is that a lot of what the experts are sprouting is not really the truth. I'm not saying these people are bad. I'm not saying they're trying to lie to us. I'm saying that they've been told these same things, and it's trained that way. It's training, and this is what comes down the pike.
You know, there are a couple of things in what you said. One of them is that for me, a big takeaway is the doctor is not God. So if the physician says something that doesn't make sense, or even if it does make sense, but it sounds like the bad news, it's not necessarily the truth or the ultimate truth about your condition. So I think people have to be encouraged to stand up, to ask questions, and to, because it's an interactive relationship. If people are not pursuing questions and saying, I want to know more than what you're telling me, then there's no reason for them to, to actually provide more or learn more. The other thing is that, the whole thing about disease. Disease is sort of, the way I see it, an end result of something. And so if you're treating the end result and you're not looking for the source that caused it, it's just kind of palliative. You're kind of taking care of the symptoms, but not altering what caused them or what's going to prevent them from getting worse.
I couldn't agree with you more, and most diseases in medicine are thought to be idiopathic in nature.
So explain what that means.
In other words, they just come out of nowhere, that they just sort of strike you because you just happen to have bad genes or whatever. And this is an experience people have, and they're, if you go to the doctor and you ask them, Doc, why do I have this disease? Your doctor will invariably list the following 6 things, and I have this in my book. It runs in your family.
Okay.
It's genetic. You're too old. You're too fat. It's all in your head, and nobody knows what causes this disease. And so actually every single disease has a genetic component. There's absolutely no argument there. And every disease does run in families, which part of it is an overlap of genetic, but also it runs in your families because there's lifestyles or environmental things that do, coincide with family living. As we get older, things tend to get worse. Your car falls apart as it gets older and accumulates damage, accumulates junk, and there's no doubt that that can occur. Being overweight will clearly make things worse for you because being overweight causes changes in your body chemistry, which causes more inflammation, which affects your hormones and all. It's a self-propelling,
Right.
It moves things forward in that direction. All in your head. Every single thought that you have creates some sort of biochemical response in your body which affects you. So I have no argument with those other 5, but when they tell you that nobody knows, that means they asked everybody and nobody knew. Well, they didn't ask me, right? And there's other people that they didn't ask either, and there have been countless brilliant clinicians, researchers, healers throughout the centuries that have come up with real answers to these questions that they didn't ask them, and they've been completely ignored by mainstream. Part of it is because it's bad for business.
Yes. It's interesting that you say that, bad for business, because I'm diabetic, and I was diagnosed as being diabetic many, many years ago. And I remember seeing an endocrinologist in Manhattan, and he taught medicine as well. And he said, and that was the time when those testing machines were just coming out, whatever, and he said, you have to test, and he was great. He educated me every time. But he said, when I'm teaching my students about, the testing and, self-management, these are students who want to be physicians. He said, very often they challenge me and they say, well, what will they need me for then? Which is shocking. Like, I'm not going to get you well. I'm not going to give you all the tools that could keep you healthy, because then why would you need me?
It's terrible. My goal as a physician, really, I'm a teacher. I'm going to teach people to be well and guide them in the right direction and use the expertise and experience that I have in my knowledge to move them in the right direction. But my goal is for them never to see me again and to live happily ever after.
And there are enough people on the planet that
Right.
you'll be kept in business.
Right.
Yes.
I'm not worried about run out of patients. But
So
yeah,
I have to ask you, I mean, I invite people to read the book and, self-educate, but what are some of the things that most of us are doing a lot of the time that we shouldn't be doing, that we could stop right now?
In other words, what are some of the biggest lies that we're being fed that
Yes.
are making us sick? And the answer is the big fat lie is one of the biggest lies that has been perpetuated upon the human race. And I mean literally the big fat lie about fat. Saturated fat and dietary cholesterol are actually very good for us. And yet we've been told for decades that these are toxins, and the less saturated fat you put in your body and the less dietary cholesterol you put in your body, the better off you are. This is an absolute farce. That there's absolutely zero scientific evidence
Wow.
to affirm this. This is not my opinion. This is a scientific fact. And if you look at an article, you see this all the time, by the way, and a lot of times it'll be phrased this way: it is thought that saturated fat is bad. Or they will say that saturated fat is bad, and they will give a reference. That reference will give you some recommendation from society, like American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association. Go to the American Diabetes Association, go to the American Medical Association, go look at their references. They'll reference another expert group, and the expert groups just keep referencing each other. There is zero evidence that saturated fat is bad for us. There's zero evidence that dietary cholesterol is bad for us. This was a notion that was actually created by the food companies to sell something called margarine.
Wow.
And I don't blame the food companies, because the food companies want to make money, and margarine's cheaper than butter, so they're going to replace something that's more expensive with something less expensive and tell us that it's better for us. And now we've all heard the big whoops that happened from the 1970s. Whoops, we're sorry, margarine's actually really not good. We made a mistake. Now, you remember this, right, from the 70s. So do you see margarine in the stores anymore? They don't really call it margarine anymore. There's all sorts of fancy names, and I'm not going to name all the names, but
Right.
you know what I'm talking about.
Butter. Sure, because
they all have,
interestingly enough, I never bought into it.
Right. They all have names like smart,
Right.
or healthy, or balanced. And I tell my patients, never eat any food that has the word smart in it. Never eat any food that has the word healthy in it. Never eat anything that has the word balanced in it, because they're trying to fool you. So
It's a marketing ploy, and we buy into it because we're committed to eating smart, eating healthy, and eating balanced.
But your doctor is also telling you to do those same things. They're eating the low-fat, meals, and they're using their margarines, and they're taking their drugs to lower their cholesterol. Breast milk is full of saturated fat and full of cholesterol. It's the healthiest thing. There's no argument. It's the healthiest thing you can possibly give an infant. Then you may say, well, doc, isn't it true that infants have different dietary requirements than adults? And the answer is no, it's pretty similar. The saturated fats in breast milk make up about 55% of the caloric intake of breast milk. And believe it or not, your diet, if you want to be really healthy, should be about 55% saturated fat. That's what my diet is.
Wow.
I eat saturated fat at every single meal, and I eat cholesterol at every meal because I want to be healthy.
I'm so happy to hear that, because I love butter. and oils, and yes. So, okay, saturated fat, so that's one of the big lies. What's another big lie?
There's so many, but soy is a huge scam. We've been told that soy is good. Now, why is soy good? Well, soy is good because it's low in saturated fat and low in cholesterol. This is all part of the big fat lie. So anything that's low in saturated fat and low in cholesterol becomes good. So now you have all this whole market out there with the soys. Nuts are good. Why? Because they're low in saturated fat and low in cholesterol. So you have, these foods. Soy is very, very toxic. It destroys your thyroid. It's an anti-nutrient. It keeps you from absorbing very precious minerals. It has phytoestrogenic effects. In other words, it has hormonal effects in the form of estrogen. And estrogen is not a very good hormone to have in high quantities in your body. And there's a lot of other estrogenic toxins in our environment. So this is something it's a huge lie.
One of the things I read in your book is the issue of sugars and the encouragement to eat tons of fruit. So talk to me about that.
Okay, well, a fruit, yeah, the fact that we all hear from a lot of experts all the time, eat your fruits and vegetables, like they're the same thing. Are they the same thing?
That's a good point.
But they lump them together.
Yes.
Now, do an experiment. Take your 4-year-old grandson and put a pile of fruit in front of him and put a pile of vegetables in front of him, and guess which ones he's going to go for?
The fruit.
Okay, so how come a 4-year-old knows the difference, and yet the expert doesn't know the difference? Why does your 4-year-old want the fruit? Because it's full of sugar. Oh, but it's got fructose. Isn't that the good sugar? No. Actually, fructose is the worst sugar you can put in your body. This is another one of the big fat lies out there. Fructose is terrible. Fructose raises your triglycerides, causes insulin resistance, raises blood pressure, blood sugar, causes obesity.
Now,
terrible.
Okay, so now I have to ask you a question. So we look at products and it has fructose in it, so I could get that it's now been extracted from the fruit, and so it's instantly metabolized as sugar, and that seems not good. But what if you're eating it with the fiber with it? Isn't it good for you?
Fruit, I believe, now this is my opinion now, okay?
Right.
Okay. I believe we have fruit on this earth to serve one purpose, and that's to make us fat, which is a good thing if famine is coming. And if you consider these cycles of the seasons, when do we have fruit available? In New Jersey, for example. At the end of the summer, it will ripen to prepare us for the winter. That's when we would naturally have fruit available to us, because we would starve if we didn't have a little extra meat on our bones in the winter. But we now have fruit available from all over the world, 365 days a year. This is not natural at all. And to answer your question specifically, yes, there's some good things in fruit. Don't get me wrong. There's phytonutrients, there's fibers, there's minerals in there. But all of these things can be obtained from vegetables. You do not need to eat fruit.
Ever.
Ever. And if you're diabetic, if you're overweight, I tell my
I
patients,
am both.
do not eat any fruit. There's no good reason for you to be eating fruit if you have those conditions. And there's a lot of other people that I tell them not to eat fruit
Right.
either.
Wow, that's a little challenging and shocking, because it goes against everything we've been taught. And I think really what's great, what you said, was the distinction. We lump fruit and vegetable together, and they're not the same thing.
Not even close.
So in your book, you said you don't have to be sick, you don't have to be fat, you don't have to be tired, you don't have to suffer from chronic degenerative disease, etc., etc. Almost all of these conditions are a result of imbalances in your life, and primarily imbalances in your diet. Okay, so fat's okay, saturated fat is okay, as a matter of fact it's good, fruits are and so what should we be eating?
You want to eat plenty of low-starch vegetables. Why? Because they have minerals, they have the fiber in there, they have phytonutrients, they're going to fill you up, they're not going to distort your blood sugar. You want to drink plenty of water. You want to eat some portion of either meat, fish, poultry, eggs, or cheese at every single meal. Why? Because they contain healthy saturated fats and healthy dietary cholesterol. Those are really the things that you need. You need your meats and vegetables and your water. And basically that's what I consume myself. There's one other thing that's not really, I do mention this in my book. It's very, very under-recognized and underappreciated. It's called sunlight. Now, there's nobody making money off of sunlight. There's plenty of people making money off of sunscreens, and there's plenty of dermatologists out there that are, poking off little lesions that you have all over the place. Sunlight is absolutely vital to our health. And there's an epidemic around the world of vitamin D deficiency. And the reason for this is because we're not getting enough sun. In fact, you'd have to eat pounds of fish liver every day, pounds of it, just to have the recommended daily allowance of vitamin D. So what about people that don't live near the ocean? Where were they going to get their vitamin D from? So if you look at it from that standpoint, the only logical conclusion you can come to is that we must get our vitamin D from the sun. But the sun gives us more than just vitamin D. It has other ingredients in there, in those ultraviolet radiation, that really is very important for maintaining our hormone balance, our immune system balance, our nervous system balance. It's extraordinarily underappreciated, and I hear very few people recommending sunlight. You hear just the exact opposite.
So what about the whole skin cancer scare, and now there isn't enough of an ozone layer to protect you from the sun, et cetera, et cetera?
more cancers are caused by lack of sunlight than
Really?
cancers cause sunlight. You know, I talk in the book about the Goldilocks principle. Basically, too much or too little of anything that's nutritious is bad. By definition, this is just common sense. Too much sunlight is absolutely not good for you, but too little is really bad as well. And where do you fall on that spectrum? Most people are getting way too little, I can tell you that for sure. So when it comes to nutrients, you want to have the right amount. When it comes to poisons, less is always better.
So in terms of sunlight, you know, what would what would be an adequate amount of time in the sun?
This is a very variable question and answer, I should say, because it depends on where do you live, what time of year.
Right here in New Jersey right now.
Right now, you literally couldn't get enough sunlight.
Okay, got it.
What's your skin color like? How much clothing are you wearing?
So how do people assess that for themselves?
You know, I tell people that you want to try to get as much sunlight as you get outside. You don't necessarily need to tan. Some of the light actually comes right through your eyes, and it goes right into your hypothalamus, which is part of your brain, and helps create a good balance in terms of your immune system, your hormonal system, and your nervous system. But you want to be outside frequently, and a lot of people literally never, ever get real sunlight in their eyes because they're always wearing glasses or contact lenses, and so they're light deprived.
It's very interesting that you say that, because I lived at a yoga center in India years ago, and it's hot in India and it's sunny, but they told us every day to be out in the sun for some period of time and to look at the sun, actually. So it's pretty interesting. Now, I want to ask you about vegetarianism, okay, because you're saying, you know, animal protein. So let's talk about vegetarianism, because there are a lot of people out there who would argue with you.
They would argue with me, yes.
And
they would be wrong. But I do address vegetarianism in my book. And here's, I think, a lot of the experience that the vegetarians have. And I have a lot of respect for vegetarianism and veganism. These people, they want it. They're being proactive. They're trying to help themselves and help the world. But I think they've fallen for the big fat lie. And a lot of them may have the experience where they're maybe junk food junkies, and all of a sudden they become a vegetarian, and they start eating natural and raw and organic, and they feel better because their diet is less bad than it used to be. That doesn't mean it's good. That just means it's less bad. And they may be able to feel pretty good for years or even decades, but I've seen a ton of patients in my practice that after 2 or 3 decades of vegetarianism, they start to become really sick because they've depleted their bodies of very vital nutrients. So I tell vegetarians, listen, if you want to be a vegetarian, eat plenty of cheese, plenty of eggs, plenty of butter. There's a culture in India, the Hindus, that they basically practice vegetarianism. You familiar with them?
sure.
Okay, they have a special ingredient that they put on every single meal. Ghee, exactly. What is ghee?
Clarified butter.
It's butter. So in India, clarified butter is considered a health food. It's been there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And these people maintain relatively good health because they're using the ghee.
Plus coconut oil?
They come to this country, and all of a sudden they hear, oh my God, it's butter, and their cardiologist tells them, don't use that stuff, it's going to clog their arteries. Guess what happens when they stop using the ghee? They gain weight, their blood pressure goes up, they develop diabetes and heart disease because they're not consuming butter.
Wow, this is a good news for a lot of people.
But if you think about what I'm telling you, it makes sense. There's no paradoxes out there. A lot of times they try to explain stuff by saying, well, it's just a paradox. And that explains it?
Right.
Are you kidding me?
It's just like there's no reason for this disease. So what about the statistics on, let's say, the Japanese women having very low breast cancer, and then coming to this country and starting to eat meat, and the incidence of breast cancer goes way up?
So the meat did it?
Well, presumably, that's what the statistics...
Well, how many variables are you controlling for?
I have no idea, but I had another nutritionist physician on the show who kind of pointed that out.
Okay, well, see, the thing is, when you do an experiment, you have to have one variable. When you go from one culture to another culture, are you adding more sugars now? Are you doing other things? Are you getting less light? Are you using margarine instead of butter? And here's the biggie, by the way, which I believe is one of the biggest things, is in Japan, they eat seaweed all the time. Seaweed is very, very high in iodine. And in this country, we should be scared of iodine. That's what the experts tell us. They have what we call iodophobia, fear of iodine. So and so actually low iodine can really, really contribute to breast cancer. So I'm not buying this type of stuff.
Okay, good. I wanted to ask you that. And we're about 3 minutes away from completion, so I want to ask you one more question, because this is a biggie, and aspartame. Tell us about aspartame.
You really want to know this, and I do talk about this in my book. Aspartame was originally developed as an insecticide. It causes neuroexcitotoxic damage to the insects. In other words, it excites the neurons, the brain cells, to the point that the brain cells are destroyed and the insect dies. Legend has it that one day in the lab, some researcher licked his fingers and said, "Oh my God, this stuff's really sweet." And then some genius in the marketing department decided, "Oh wow, we can make more money if we sell this as a sweetener than if we sell it as an insecticide." So this company, who I won't name, took this product.
You could name them.
Monsanto
Okay.
took this product off the market and started marketing it as a sweetener. It is absolutely poisonous. I tell people to avoid this, and a lot of people are walking around with aspartame poisoning and suffering headaches and jitteriness and all sorts of degenerative nerve disease because they're consuming too much aspartame, in addition to other things.
I think that's a really useful piece of information. So we've got 2 minutes left. I want to give you a chance to summarize, what you most want people to know and what you think is vital, other than, checking out your book.
Well, what's vital is that we don't have to be sick, and you don't have to be fat, and you don't have to age before your time. You don't have to have a lot of chronic diseases. So many of the diseases that every single person that is walking around that you look at, they're actually poisoning themselves, and it doesn't have to be that way. The problem is that the misinformation out there is just, it's overwhelming, and you really can't turn on the TV or the radio or the newspaper or even go in the supermarket or anywhere without hearing misinformation. It's just, it's scary. When I walk in the supermarket, sometimes I see people with their families and they have young children, and I look at their shopping cart. I just want to take them and grab them and say, "Look at what you're doing." And yet these people are trying hard.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's very, very sad to me. So I want people to know that if, the information I have in my book is very important, could literally change your life, and it's something that they should look into.
Yeah, and I invite people to do that. And I think, coming from a physician, it's really important because you're not considered the fringe element, you're someone with all the training and saying, wait a minute, wake up, do your homework, and ask a lot of questions and start shifting things. We're out of time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Natasha.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.